Let's unpack this. Today, we were taking a deep dive into the legacy of Joanne Martin. She was, well, an incredible woman, a talented nightclub performer, independent, who then became this quiet, really powerful force behind what's now the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, or DBSA. It's a fascinating story, really, about taking something deeply personal, painful even, and building something huge that's helped millions.
It really is an indispensable piece of mental health history. We're looking at the grassroots origins of DBSA today and focusing on Joanne Martin's journey, right, from 1936 to 2017. She was described as soft-spoken, quiet, but our mission really is to see how she used her own firsthand experience, those are her words, with manic depression. How she used that to push for this huge shift from people feeling totally alone to, finding community, sharing resources, peer support, basically.
Yeah. And that context, the when of it all, is so important here. She was a musician, loved piano, started lessons when she was just 5, and she was actually teaching music at a school for the blind when she got that first diagnosis. Manic depression, early 1960s. You have to think back then, a diagnosis like that, it carried such immense stigma. People were just isolated and no public support networks to speak of.
Exactly. Think about it. That was the same year JFK was assassinated. It gives you a sense of the time. The resources were all institutional, not community-based like we see now. And she remembered that period vividly, being severely depressed, then swinging into mania all summer long. Just terrifying. And that struggle, that intense personal battle, it really fueled her search for connection, for someone else who got it.
Right. Let's trace that path. Section 1. The performer's struggle and the genesis of advocacy. So her first marriage ends, and she pivots. She starts performing, singing, playing piano in nightclubs. Started out at an Elks Club in Iowa, then spent 3 years in Atlanta.
Yeah, building a career. You're trying to make it work, all while dealing with this incredibly intense, often hidden illness. But when the depression got worse, she had to stop performing for a while. She went back to Lansing, Michigan, and that's when she had her second hospitalization. And the sources mentioned both stays were about 5 weeks long. That's a significant time out of your life, right?
Definitely. But she had this real drive, this need for independence. She moved to Detroit, performed there from 73 to 86, had some really nice singing jobs, as she put it. The interviewer actually noted she looked like a model, kind of reminded them of Marlo Thomas in That Girl, forging her own way, creating her own career path, while fighting this huge private battle.
That contrast is so striking, isn't it? This polished, capable performer on the outside, and the private anguish she was managing. It really highlights how hidden these illnesses can be. Despite everything she achieved, she still felt like the Lone Ranger after that 64 diagnosis. And that feeling, that deep need for anyone who understood, that's what really pushed her towards advocacy.
That drive was immense. You can see it so clearly. The real start of DBSA seems to be 1983. She's still performing in Dearborn, Michigan then. And get this, she was driving 5 hours every Monday, her night off, just to go to Chicago for a support group meeting. That commitment, it tells you everything about how desperate the need was, how much she valued that peer connection.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And the proof is in the numbers, right? When she finally started her own group, and Dearborn first meeting was at the Henry Ford Library, 25 people showed up immediately. The next meeting, 50 people. It just exploded. It showed how much people were starving for a safe place to connect, to talk openly.
Wow. That kind of growth must have been amazing, but also maybe overwhelming, which sort of leads us into Section 2, building the alliance and achieving stability.
Absolutely. Spot on. Martin herself admitted she took on too much running that Dearborn group. Said she was doing too much.
Yeah.
And she ended up slipping back into a depressive episode because of it, which in turn really focused her attention on, managing the illness itself, specifically medication. Her doctor first just increased her lithium, didn't work, but they eventually found the right combo for her. Lithium plus a newer medication at the time called Dizerol. That's trazodone.
And this is such a key insight she shared, still totally relevant today. She really stressed that because a medication works well for one person does not mean it will work the same for someone else. That's like the core wisdom you get from these support groups, isn't it? Sharing those very personal journeys with meds.
Exactly. It's all about that shared experience, figuring out what works for you. Then her life took another big turn in 1986. She moved to Riverside, California. That's where she met Saul Kent, who became her husband. Apparently, she met him at a club near Detroit, and her opening line to him, she thought this was hilarious, was, "This gout is really bothering me."
Huh? That's brilliant. Ever the performer, right? Leading with something unexpected. But it's interesting, that move seems pivotal. She finds stability, maybe partly through meeting Saul Kent, maybe the California climate, and then the advocacy work moves west with her. By the fall of '87, she'd started the Riverside DBSA group.
And the impact she had in California just shows the massive need she was filling. Get this. When she started that group, there were only 3 such support groups in the entire state of California. 3. By 2010, when the interview we're drawing from happened, there were 84. To go from 3 to 84 in just over 2 decades? That's not just growth. That's like building a whole parallel support system from the ground up.
And maybe the most inspiring part is how she became this model of stability herself. She'd reportedly been stable since that move to California in '86. She kept going to the group meetings, not because she was in crisis, but to show people it was possible, to show functioning. She even said she felt she was doing more now than she did when she was working as an entertainer.
That functioning aspect is crucial. It's the proof of concept. But she also knew that just emotional support wasn't enough. To really make a difference, to save lives, she had to tackle the stigma directly. And that meant educating people, explaining what this illness actually is, and just as importantly, what it isn't.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, defining and understanding bipolar disorder. Joanne Martin wasn't just offering comfort, she was providing vital clinical education, defining bipolar disorder, or manic depression as it was known, as a treatable illness, marked by those extreme shifts in mood, thought, energy, behavior, and constantly hammering home. It is not a character flaw. It's not a personal weakness.
And the numbers are pretty staggering. Nearly 6 million adults in the U.S. affected. Usually starts in late adolescence. Affects men and women pretty equally. Though there's an interesting pattern sometimes in how it first shows up. Men often start with mania, women more often with depression. And there's definitely a sense it runs in families, suggesting a genetic link. Though, interestingly, Martin noted her own 2 daughters didn't have the disorder.
Okay, so let's dig into the symptoms she was helping people understand. That manic phase, the highs. What did that look like in practical terms? She talked about rapid speech, right, rushing around, maybe spending way too much money, feeling like you have world-changing ideas.
Exactly. And she drew from her own life there, too. She remembered being so manic, she'd be on the phone across the country in the middle of the night. Just couldn't stop.
Yeah.
It often includes increased sexual activity, just this relentless high energy level, which, as she pointed out, can sometimes look like someone's on street drugs to an outsider. And if it really escalates, that's when you might see grandiose thinking, believing you're, God or somebody so important.
Yeah.
And that often leads to hospitalization or sometimes, sadly, trouble with the law.
And then the crash, the depression, the lows, sounds physically and mentally devastating. And it tends to last longer than the mania, right? She described it as just no energy, can't get out of bed, physical aches, head to toe, just this profound hopelessness. And that's where the danger of suicide becomes incredibly high.
Yeah, a very high risk, often manifesting in subtle ways, like suddenly giving away prized possessions or talking about how people would be better off without them. Watch signs.
Yeah, the warning signs are critical.
She shared a really gut-wrenching example from her time performing in Atlanta. When she crashed into depression there, she could only manage to work 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week, tops. She said she set alarms just to force herself up for an instant breakfast, then maybe a TV dinner later, then right back to bed. She called it a terrible life, just surviving, not living.
Wow. That lived experience, that terrible life, really forms the foundation for Section 4, doesn't it? Treatment and the DBSA approach. Once someone recognizes these symptoms in themselves or a loved one, what's the next step towards getting stable?
Right. The first crucial step is getting a diagnosis. And that means building a professional team, seeing both a psychiatrist for medication management usually, and a therapist for talk therapy. And Martin was adamant about this. The 2 professionals need to work together. They need to communicate. But just as importantly, the patient has to be an equal partner in their own care. She was really clear, you're not the little sickie, and this is the God up here telling you what to do. You have agency. If that's not the dynamic you have with your doctor, she implied, find a different doctor.
That insistence on patient empowerment, especially back then in the '80s medical world, that must have felt revolutionary for people in her groups. He also helped clarify the different types, right? Bipolar 1 versus bipolar 2.
Yeah, generally bipolar 1 involves more pronounced mania, the real highs.
Yeah.
Bipolar 2 tends to feature more depression, the lows. But the key diagnostic point is that you only need one documented manic episode to qualify for a bipolar diagnosis. Just one.
Okay, so treatment options, what did she discuss?
Well, various things. She noted there's no simple blood test, right? So diagnosis is based on symptoms and history. Treatments include medications, lots of different types now, talk therapy, definitely. And she also mentioned modern electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. She made a point of saying modern ECT is much different than One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's much more targeted now, less memory loss. It can be a really valuable tool, especially for severe treatment-resistant depression.
And this is where the DBSA model really comes into its own, I think. The support groups provide that safe space, right? To share ideas, talk honestly about medication side effects, which doctors often don't have time to fully explore. And crucially, they share lists of doctors and therapists that group members actually use and trust. That peer recommendation is gold.
It creates real accountability and practical help. Martin noted that, yeah, initially some doctors felt threatened by these groups popping up. Like, who are these patients talking amongst themselves? But eventually the medical community largely came around, especially now with budget cuts and doctors being so overloaded, they often refer patients to DBSA. They see it as a vital part of the treatment landscape.
It's amazing, a community safety net built entirely by people who've been there. Which leads us to our final section, Section 5, the legacy. Community, confidentiality, and saving lives.
Yes, and the foundation is trust. Strict confidentiality is rule number one in the groups. People have to feel safe to really open up. And Joanne Martin was passionate about more than just stability. She encouraged members to reconnect with themselves, pursue old dreams, talents they maybe put aside because of the illness. She observed that many people with bipolar and depression have a lot of artistic abilities. She didn't want the illness to define them, to leave their life feeling like a blank page.
And the thing that stands out most, just personally, is the sheer kindness, the radical hospitality of her commitment. This unique thing with the Riverside group, the holiday mission. She literally opened her own home for every single major holiday. Thanksgiving, Christmas inside, Memorial Day, 4th of July by the pool.
It wasn't just about coping. It was about thriving and belonging, a complete model of inclusion, showing that stability means connection, especially during those times, holidays, when society puts so much pressure on family and togetherness. And when the memories of being alone can be so painful, her reason was so simple and so powerful. We don't want people to be alone. She knew that feeling. She remembered staying home, isolated, convinced everyone else was out having fun.
That just hits hard. It's so deeply empathetic. She said her mission ultimately was to save two kinds of lives. Those literally facing suicide in that immediate crisis, and also the lives that felt wasted by the illness. The people looking back at that blank page thinking their potential was lost.
And that mission wasn't just for the person with the diagnosis, it embraced the whole support system. The groups are open to everyone, family members, spouses, friends, supporters. They can come and just listen, learn, begin to understand what their loved one is going through, which in turn strengthens that home support system. It reduces the shame, the burden for everybody involved.
We really have to end with her own words, her core philosophy. It just sums up everything perfectly. She said, if you can come out of it and use all of your knowledge to help others, it's worth it. It's a gift. I have met some wonderful people that I would have never met if it weren't for this illness.
It's just, yeah. Joanne Martin's story powerfully shows the immense value of peer support. It's not just about feeling less alone, though that's huge. It's about practical resources, like those doctor lists. And maybe most importantly, it provides a visible path forward, a way to find renewed purpose, stability. She literally saved lives just by being brave enough to share her own story and create that space for others.
Absolutely. And if you listening are interested in finding out more or connecting with these resources she helped build, the website mentioned in our sources is dbiesaytoday.com. You can find information there, newsletters, connect with local groups and events.
And maybe here's a final thought for you to take away from this deep dive. We talked about the genetic component, right? How mental illness often seems to run in families. So the question is, what role does community and learned stability, the kind modeled by people like Joanne Martin, what role does that play in maybe breaking that cycle, breaking the generational pattern of shame and silence, so that even if there's a biological vulnerability, it doesn't automatically mean a life of isolation?
That's a really powerful question to chew on, something to think about. Thank you for diving deep with us today.